My hands were shaking as I stood on my own front porch, key pressed against the lock, but not yet turning it. I had only been gone 40 minutes. 40 minutes, and yet something made me stop, a sound drifting through the open kitchen window, carried on the warm September air like something I wasn't supposed to hear. My son's voice, and then hers. I stood very still and listened. I want to tell you that what I heard that afternoon broke my heart. And it did. But more than that, it changed everything I thought I knew about the life I had built, the family I had raised, and the woman I still had left to become. My name is Margaret. I am 64 years old. I taught high school English for 31 years in the same district where I grew up, in the same town where I married my husband Gerald, where I brought my son home from the hospital in a yellow blanket because we didn't know he was going to be a boy, and I had refused to find out. Gerald passed away 3 years ago from a heart attack that came on a Tuesday morning while he was drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper, which is the most Gerald way to go that I can possibly imagine. We had 37 years together, good years. Not perfect, but good, which I have come to believe is actually better than perfect. After Gerald died, I stayed in our house. Of course I did. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a backyard garden I had been tending since 1994. My neighbor Barbara kept telling me I was brave for staying alone in such a big place. I never thought of it as brave. I thought of it as simply knowing where I belonged. My son Daniel was 38. He worked in commercial real estate, which sounds impressive until you understand that he had been working in commercial real estate for 12 years and had very little to show for it. He was charming in the way that certain people are charming, the kind that works beautifully at dinner parties and falls apart under any real pressure. Gerald used to say that Daniel had been blessed with his mother's warmth and cursed with his father's stubbornness, and I always laughed because I knew Gerald was wrong on both counts. Daniel's stubbornness came entirely from me. Vanessa had been in the picture for almost 2 years. She was 32, worked in financial planning, and had the kind of polished smile that made you feel simultaneously welcomed and assessed. I had tried to like her. I genuinely had, but there was something in the way she looked at my house, not at the porch roses or the window boxes I replanted every spring, but at the square footage, at the updated kitchen, at the neighborhood itself that made a small, quiet part of me uneasy. I had told myself I was being an overprotective mother. I had talked myself out of that feeling at least a dozen times. I should have listened to it from the beginning. That Tuesday afternoon, I had driven to my book club at Patricia's house on Elm Street, only to discover 3 blocks in that I had left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter. We were discussing a novel with very small print, and I am too vain to borrow someone else's glasses, so I turned the car around. The round trip took less than 10 minutes. I pulled into my own driveway, walked up the porch steps, and that was when I heard them through the screen of the kitchen window I always left cracked in warm weather. Daniel's voice first, low, but not low enough. She left her glasses again. That's the 3rd time this month, Vanessa. And Vanessa's reply, quick and deliberate, like she had been waiting for exactly this opening. 3 times is a pattern, Daniel. We document these things. A good attorney can work with a pattern. I did not move. I am not sure I breathed. She's going to notice if we start writing things down, my son said. She won't notice, Vanessa said. That's the whole point. By the time it's in front of a judge, she'll be confused enough that anything she says can be reframed. Honestly, Daniel, the house alone, do you know what this property is worth right now in this market? We've been sitting on this for 2 years waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment. There was a pause. I heard the refrigerator open and close. What about the attorney Gerald used? Daniel asked. She might call him. Then we get ahead of it, Vanessa said. I have a colleague who specializes in elder law. We establish a paper trail. We get her evaluated by the right doctor. We file for guardianship. It's cleaner than you think. And once we have legal control, she's my mother. The words came out of my son's mouth, and for one terrible, suspended second I hoped that he was going to say something that would make this make sense, that he was going to push back, that I had misunderstood. And this is her legacy, Vanessa said smoothly. We're protecting it. She can't manage a property this size on a teacher's pension, Daniel. You know that. We're being responsible. Another pause. Okay, my son said. Okay. 1 word, 2 letters. And the entire shape of my life rearranged itself around that word like furniture moved in the dark. I stepped back from the porch, slowly, carefully, the way you move when you do not want to make a sound. I walked back down the steps and sat in my car, in my own driveway for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard, because I needed something to anchor me to the present moment, while the rest of me was trying to absorb what I had just heard. Then I drove back to Patricia's house and borrowed her reading glasses and sat through 2 hours of book club discussion about a novel I retained absolutely nothing of, and when Patricia asked me at the end if I was feeling all right, I smiled and told her the coffee had been a little stronger than usual. I did not tell a single person what I had heard. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. The drive home that evening, I made a decision. I was not going to cry. I was not going to confront Daniel in a moment of raw emotion and give Vanessa the ammunition she needed to say I was unstable. I was not going to change anything about my behavior or my routine in any way that either of them would notice. I was going to be exactly who I had always been, a 64-year-old retired schoolteacher who forgot her glasses and tended her garden and went to book club on Tuesday afternoons. And very quietly, underneath all of that, I was going to dismantle everything they had planned. The first thing I did the next morning was call Gerald's attorney. His name was Robert Calloway, and he had been handling our family's legal affairs for 22 years. I had known him long enough to call him by his first name and to know that he took his coffee black and that he had a photograph of his golden retriever on his desk that he had not updated since the dog passed away in 2019, because he said he liked the company. I did not call from my cell phone. I called from Patricia's landline because Patricia lived 2 streets over and had been my closest friend for 19 years, and because I trusted her absolutely, and because I had finally told her everything the morning after book club over a pot of strong tea at her kitchen table. Patricia had sat very still through the whole story. When I finished, she set down her mug and said, "Tell me what you need me to do." That is the thing about a real friend. They don't tell you what to feel. They ask you what you need. Robert was at his desk when I called. He listened without interrupting, which is one of his best qualities, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Margaret, I want you to come in today. Not tomorrow. Today." I drove to his office that afternoon while Daniel thought I was at my water aerobics class. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, which was probably unnecessary but made me feel better. Robert had already pulled Gerald's estate documents by the time I sat down across from him. He walked me through everything methodically. The house was in my name alone, had been since Gerald and I had refinanced 17 years ago, and there was no mechanism by which Daniel could claim any portion of it without my death or a court-ordered guardianship. The guardianship route that was the real concern. That was what Vanessa was steering toward. A guardianship petition requires a medical evaluation, Robert told me. They would need a physician to attest to cognitive impairment. "Do you have a regular doctor?" I told him I had seen Dr. Patricia Okafor at Riverside Medical every 6 months for the past decade, that my last cognitive screening 6 weeks ago had been completely normal, and that I had documentation of this. Robert nodded slowly. "Good. Here's what I want you to do." He gave me a list. It was a long list, and every item on it was specific and practical, and writing it all down made me feel, for the first time since the porch, like I had some ground under my feet. He updated my will that afternoon. Everything to charity, a literacy foundation that Gerald and I had donated to for years, with one provision. If Daniel could demonstrate, through a licensed therapist's documentation over a period of not less than 12 months, that he had genuinely severed his relationship with Vanessa and understood the harm of what he had participated in, there was a path for reconsideration. Robert told me that was generous. I told him I was his mother, and I was not ready to close every door, but I was absolutely ready to lock this one. The next step was the house itself. I called a locksmith the following Thursday while Daniel was at work and had every exterior lock changed. I told Daniel I had lost a spare key which, given the glasses situation, was entirely believable, and that I had decided it was time to update the locks anyway. He accepted this without blinking. He had no reason not to. He had no idea I had been in Robert's office. I also called a home security company. I had 2 cameras installed outside, one covering the front porch and driveway, and one covering the back door that led to the kitchen. I told Daniel I had been reading about home security and thought it was sensible at my age to have them. He actually helped me pick out the models. He had no idea they came with interior audio on the porch sensor. I want to tell you that I felt guilty doing all of this. But the truth is, and I have thought hard about this, what I felt was not guilt. It was grief. There is a difference. Guilt says, I am doing something wrong. Grief says, something that mattered to me has already been broken, and I am only now beginning to understand how broken it is. I grieved for the version of my son I thought I knew. I grieved for the easy Sunday phone calls and the Christmas mornings and the belief that the people closest to you are also the ones most invested in your safety. I grieved for all of that, but I did not stop. Over the next 3 weeks, I also did the following things. I moved my financial power of attorney to Robert, removing Daniel as the named agent. I transferred a portion of my savings into a separate account that Daniel had no knowledge of. I gathered every document deed, insurance policies, Gerald's death certificate, my own medical records, and placed them in a safety deposit box at a branch of my bank across town, not the branch on Main Street that Daniel had occasionally accompanied me to. I made 2 copies of everything and gave 1 set to Robert and 1 to Patricia. I went to my book club. I went to water aerobics. I tended my garden. I had Daniel and Vanessa over for dinner on a Saturday and made Gerald's lasagna recipe and listened to Vanessa talk about a property she had just helped a client acquire in the Midwest. And I smiled and passed the bread and asked her questions about her work, and I watched her watching my house. And I thought, you have no idea what is already done. It was at that dinner that Vanessa made her first visible move. She mentioned, very casually, over dessert, that she had a friend who was a geriatric specialist and that he had begun doing in-home wellness assessments for older adults living alone. Very non-invasive, she said. Just peace of mind. She looked at Daniel when she said it, not at me, and that told me everything about whose idea this had been. I said it sounded very interesting. I asked for the doctor's name. I wrote it down on a notepad in the kitchen and then, after they left, I called Robert the next morning and gave him the name. Robert called me back that afternoon. The doctor's name was not associated with any mainstream geriatric practice. He had 3 malpractice complaints filed in the last 4 years. He had testified in 2 guardianship hearings, both times for the petitioning party, both resulting in asset transfers that had subsequently been contested. I cannot tell you what I felt reading Robert's email with those details. I had spent 31 years teaching 17-year-olds to think critically, to question sources, to ask who benefits from the story being told. And here was my son's girlfriend using a discredited physician as a weapon against a woman who had spent her whole adult life trying to make people sharper than this. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time that evening. I looked around the room at the wallpaper Gerald and I had picked out together in 1998, at the ceramic rooster on top of the refrigerator that my mother had given me as a housewarming gift when we first moved in, at the window box outside where the last of the summer petunias were still holding on. I thought about whether there was any version of this where Daniel had not understood what Vanessa was planning, where he had somehow been deceived. I thought about it honestly and carefully, the way I tried to approach everything honestly and carefully. And then I remembered his voice saying, okay, 1 word. And I let myself feel, fully and completely, and without softening it, what that word had cost me. Then I dried my eyes, refilled my tea, and called Robert to discuss the next step. What I am about to tell you is something I have gone back and forth about, including, but I think you deserve to hear the whole truth, because partial truths are how we end up blindsided on our own front porches. 2 weeks after that dinner, Vanessa contacted Daniel's cousin, my nephew Kevin, who lived in Phoenix, and told him, without Daniel's knowledge apparently, that she was worried about me. She said I had seemed confused at the dinner, that I had repeated myself several times, that she had noticed I was having trouble with dates. Kevin, who is a kind and anxious person, called me immediately and asked, gently, if I was doing all right. I thanked him for his concern. I told him I was perfectly well. And then I called Kevin back 2 days later after I had spoken to Robert and told him, calmly and in detail, exactly what I had overheard on my porch in September and exactly what I had done since then, and exactly what Robert had found about the physician Vanessa had recommended. I sent Kevin a copy of my most recent medical evaluation. I sent him Robert's contact information. I told him that if anyone else in the family received similar calls from Vanessa, I would appreciate knowing about it. Kevin was very quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Aunt Margaret, I am so sorry." I told him he had nothing to apologize for. I told him this was not his mess to carry. "But I want you to understand what Vanessa was doing. She was building a network of concerned family members before I had a chance to speak for myself. She was laying groundwork. If Daniel had not called her out on going behind his back, she would have extended that network to everyone who knew me. By the time a guardianship petition landed in front of a judge, there would have been a chorus of well-meaning people saying they had noticed something was off with Margaret. None of them liars, all of them deceived. This is how it works. I want you to know this. This is how it works." The confrontation, when it finally came, was nothing like I had imagined. It was a Wednesday evening in late October. I had asked Daniel to come over for dinner, just the two of us. And he had come, and we had eaten pot roast at the kitchen table and talked about the weather, and about a former student of mine who had just published a book, and I had waited until we were both sitting with our coffee before I said, quietly and without any preamble, "I need to tell you what I heard in September." I watched his face. I saw him know immediately what I meant. And what I saw was not guilt. Exactly, it was the specific look of a person who has been afraid of a moment for so long that when it finally arrives, they almost feel relieved. I told him everything. I did not raise my voice. I had spent 31 years in classrooms, and one thing that experience teaches you is that the quieter your voice, the more carefully people listen. I told him about the porch and the window and the kitchen. I told him what Vanessa had said, word for word, because I had written it down in a notebook that same evening and memorized it. I told him about Robert, about the will, about the accounts, about the locks, about Kevin. I told him about the physician with the malpractice complaints. When I finished, Daniel said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, "Mom," just that, my name, the name he had called me since he learned to speak. I said, "I need you to understand what you agreed to." He started to say something about Vanessa, about how she had framed it, about how he had been thinking of it as practical planning rather than, and I raised one hand, very slightly, and he stopped. "I am not interested right now in what Vanessa told you," I said. "I am asking you what you decided. In my kitchen, when she laid it out for you, you said, 'Okay, Daniel.' You said, 'Okay.'" He covered his face with his hands. We sat at that table for 2 hours. "I will not tell you it was clean or simple," he cried. I did not. I had already done my crying alone in a kitchen that had held 37 years of love and 3 years of quiet grief, and I had made my peace with the fact that this conversation was not the place for my tears. My tears had served their purpose. This conversation had a different purpose. I told him what I needed from him. Honesty. Above everything else. An end to the relationship with Vanessa, not because I was asking him to be alone, but because I was telling him I would not share my life with someone who had looked at me as an asset to be extracted. Complete transparency with Robert going forward. Therapy. Real therapy. To work through whatever had made it possible for him to say, "Okay," in my kitchen. And time. A lot of time. I told him what I was offering in return. A path. Not a guarantee. A path. He asked about the will. I told him the truth about the will. All of it. He was quiet for a long moment and then he nodded. Just once. And this time, that single word of his, that gesture of assent, felt different than the one in September. This one cost him something. Vanessa is a different story. When Daniel ended things with her and explained why, she did not accept it gracefully. She contacted Robert's office twice. She left a voicemail for Kevin that he forwarded to me without comment. She made one final attempt, and this part still genuinely surprises me. With its audacity, she contacted the physician she had recommended and asked him to reach out to Daniel directly about scheduling a family wellness evaluation. Robert had anticipated this. He had a letter ready. I will not go into the legal details because they are dense, and I am not an attorney, but I will tell you that the letter referenced the malpractice complaints and the nature of the prior guardianship cases and made explicitly clear that any further contact would result in formal complaints to the state medical board and a consultation about civil liability. The doctor did not reach out to Daniel. Vanessa, after that, went quiet. I do not know what she is doing now. I genuinely do not think about her very often. What she had planned required my silence and my helplessness, and I had refused to give her either. I think about what she might have done to someone who didn't hear what I heard on that porch, someone who invited the wellness doctor in, trusting her son's girlfriend's concern, someone who signed something because a family member asked her to and she didn't want to make trouble, someone who, by the time she understood what was happening, had already lost the ground beneath her. I think about that woman. I think about her a lot. Now let me tell you what I want you to take from this. Because I did not become a teacher for 31 years without understanding that a story without a lesson is just an event. The first thing is this: your instincts about people are data. When something in you registers discomfort about a person, about a dynamic, about the way someone looks at what you own that is not paranoia, that is your mind doing exactly what it is built to do. I had felt uneasy about Vanessa from very early on, and I had overridden that feeling because I wanted to be fair, because I did not want to be the difficult mother-in-law, because I told myself I was being protective in ways I was not entitled to be. I want you to hear me clearly. Listen to yourself. You do not need to act on every instinct, but do not dismiss them. The second thing: the people most likely to harm you financially in your 60s and beyond are not strangers. They are people with proximity and access and some degree of emotional leverage over you. This is not a comfortable truth. It is, however, the truth. Know where your documents are. Know what they say. Have a relationship with an attorney that belongs to you, not to your family, not to your spouse's estate, to you, personally, independent and updated. Do this before you need it. The third thing, and this is the one I find hardest to say: you can love someone and still protect yourself from them. Love and protection are not opposites. I love my son. I have loved him since before I ever met him, since I sat in a rocking chair in a nursery with yellow curtains and imagined who he might become. That love has not changed. What has changed is my understanding that love does not protect you from harm when the person you love has chosen to participate in it. Forgiving someone and trusting them again are two entirely separate acts on entirely separate timelines. Daniel is in therapy. He has been for 3 months. He calls me every Sunday morning the way he did when he first moved out at 22. We are not where we were. We are somewhere else, somewhere with less ease and more honesty, which I suspect is where we needed to be all along. Last month, Daniel came over on a Saturday afternoon and helped me plant the winter bulbs in the back garden. We worked side by side for 2 hours without saying very much, because gardening is not a talking activity, it is a doing activity, and sometimes doing is enough. When we finished, we washed our hands at the outdoor spigot, and Daniel looked at the garden for a moment, and then he said, quietly, "Dad would have liked these." I said, "He planted the first batch of these tulips himself, the first spring after we moved in." Daniel said, "I know. I remember." We stood there for a moment longer, and then we went inside. Some doors, once closed, can be opened again, but not to the same room. You open them to a different room, one that is smaller maybe, or differently lit, or furnished with things you didn't expect. That is not a failure. That is just what happens when a door has been tested. You find out what it is made of. You find out what holds. I am 64 years old. I live alone in my house on a street I have lived on for over 30 years. My garden is put to bed for the winter. My documents are in order. My locks are changed. My attorney knows my name and keeps his coffee black and has a photograph on his desk of a dog that he misses very much. I thought, for a long time, that I had built a life that would keep me safe. I understand now that safety is not something a life provides for you. It is something you build and rebuild and tend with the same attention you give to anything worth keeping. I am not afraid anymore. For the first time in a long time, when I walk up the steps to my own porch, I feel only one thing. I feel at home.